Hello and welcome to the Overland Journal podcast. I am your host, Scott Brady, and for today's guest, we have Nick Dimbleby. Nick was actually on my very first list of dream guests for the Overland Journal podcast. Nick is a 3-decade-long photographer for Land Rover and other premium manufacturers. Nick participated in the last 4 years of the Camel Trophy, and he has traveled to over 80 countries in his explorations of the world. Nick is a consummate professional. He is renowned for his photographic work and video work. So there's a lot of insights that are gained from that, both as a photographer and as a traveler. We get to talk about Nick's vintage Land Rovers as well, and we have the conversation in Dubai in the UAE. Nick and I had just been traveling together in the Arabian desert. So please enjoy my conversation with Nick Dimbleby. This content is brought to you by Overland Journal, our premium quality print publication. The magazine was founded in 2006 with the goal of providing independent equipment and vehicle reviews, along with the most stunning adventures and photography. We care deeply about the countries and cultures we visit and share our experiences freely with our readers. We also have zero advertorial policy and do not accept any advertiser compensation for our reviews. By subscribing to Overland Journal, you're helping to support our employee-owned and veteran-owned publication. Your support also provides resources and funding for content like you are watching or listening to right now. You can subscribe directly on our website at overlandjournal.com. Nick, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I have to say that I have long admired your work, and there are so many in the industry that are familiar with your work, and they may not know you as an individual. So I'm so grateful that we can take the time today to talk about not only you as a creative, but as an adventure traveler yourself and as a Land Rover enthusiast. We got a chance to talk in the car today as we were driving the 130, the new Defender 130, from the desert into Dubai here, and we got a chance to. You have a wide and varied story, which I think is so fascinating. But I think we should start off by kind of talking about why we're both here, which is the new Land Rover Defender 130.
Absolutely, yeah.
And have you had any personal insights or thoughts that you've come to on the vehicle?
Well, I think the first thing is I think it's great. I love it. It really is. It feels like the absolutely perfect Defender now. I think with that extra load space at the back, the car just feels right. And I think one of the things that is interesting photographing it is the proportions. Now it looks very much like the sort of the long wheelbase Land Rover going way back to the sort of the 107s. Back from Series 1, that sort of five seats in the middle, and then obviously you've got the load space at the back.
Yeah, for me, I noticed that when I think about the classic Defender that I drive, it does have quite a bit of body aft of the rear axle, and this new 130 is more reminiscent of that. And I actually think that of all of the current model Land Rovers, this is the most appropriate for travel.
Absolutely,
because you still have the same wheelbase as the 110, so it's not too long. It's just right. It's it's the right porridge for travel. But then you've got an extra 13 inches of space aft of that rear axle for additional equipment. And one of the things that I liked about the vehicles that I was driving yesterday is it's actually the 5-door or the 5-seat variant. So you end up with that flat load floor in the rear. Yeah. So, and have you noticed anything really different about driving it?
No, I thought I was going to feel like it was longer, but actually, it feels you're looking forward. It looks like the sort of the normal sort of new Defender. I guess the interesting thing is here is everything's a lot bigger. Same as it is in the US, obviously. In the UK, we're a little bit more pressed for space, so I'm interested to see how it works in parking spaces and things like that. But
that's a good point. In the US, it's a right-sized vehicle. It's a competitor to the Yukon and the Denali now, and I think it's going to be well suited for. I think it's going to be very well suited for towing.
Yeah, for sure.
And of course, the embargo will have lifted by the time this goes live, but there's going to be a V8 variant of the Defender 130 as well, which I think will be very popular for towing for people who carry a lot more equipment. Although personally, I think that the inline 6 is with the turbo is just a fantastic engine.
It's a great engine, isn't it?
And we saw that in the dunes yesterday. The vehicle's
instant power.
And it makes plenty of power.
Absolutely.
And the fact that it's independent front and rear suspension in the dunes, I think they do really well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean,
Really surprised at how amazing it is in the dunes, actually. Because we had the mud terrain tyres on, so
which is usually a challenge.
A little bit of a challenge, but obviously with the right tyre pressures, which we obviously aired down before we headed out. And you got the sand mode on the terrain response system, which of course gives you that increased pickup initially, and also optimises all the different traction aids that you get. And I mean,
it really worked.
The weakest link is the driver, basically.
And that's really all we saw yesterday in the dunes, was just people that were maybe inexperienced or took maybe not quite the best line, and that was the only time that the vehicle really had any challenges. But it was also nice to see everybody working together, and we had to even use a kinetic rope to tow out one of the vehicles, and it was really neat. And for me, that was one of the joys of yesterday, is that I had the chance to just spend the whole morning with the drive team and really spend a lot more time in the dunes driving the vehicle than I would normally have been able to do. So.
Yeah, it's a great team as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
The guys that look after these events, not just here, but obviously globally,
they're incredible.
It's a great bunch of people. Really, just so experienced. They know how to do it, and it's a pleasure working.
Yeah, all of you guys are you're the masters of your craft, and everybody from David Sneath, who was on the podcast a few years ago, and the care that he puts into these drive routes and everything else like that. To you, and I learned something new about you today in the car that was so fascinating. If I understand it or remember it correctly, you were 13 years old when you published your first book.
That's right. Yes, I was. I was a nerdy teenager.
It was working out for you.
That's it. Yeah, absolutely. That's it. So I started. This is where it all started. Really, is I was interested in cars. I was interested in conversions, in sort of special modified vehicles. And Range Rover, the classic Range Rover, was back in the 70s and 80s was one of the most modified vehicles ever.
Sure.
6-wheelers, hunting vehicles for the Middle East here, convertibles, rally cars, police, the Pope Mobile, those ones converted for the Queen, all these different modifications. So as a boy, I wrote to these manufacturers and said, "Oh, please send me some photographs and information," and started to create this scrapbook, which then eventually became this book that was published by Haynes Publishing.
Yeah,
and
many of you that are listening,
when I wrote it. So.
Many of you that are listening will know the Haynes manuals because you've worked on your own Land Rover or Jeep or anything. I mean, these are prolific.
Yeah. So Haynes manuals they had like obviously they published normal books as well as the manuals. So this wasn't a technical manual.
Sure.
This was basically a sort of a scrapbook of cool photographs of some of the amazing vehicles that have been produced. So
yeah, that's where it all started, and there's a few of my own photos in there. I started to take pictures as a boy. I was into photography, and it sort of snowballed from there. Really, sort of the book came out, and it was reviewed in a magazine called Land Rover Owner, which again was at the time a very small publication being produced by 3 guys in a shed, basically, in Norfolk. So I started to do a bit of work for them, and of course,
if you remember that.
So you were 14 when you started working for the magazine.
I was, very very young, sort of.
And how did
keen photographer, and they were keen for content, and and obviously because I was. I was keen to do stuff, and I was still at school, but my parents were kind enough to give me lifts to sort of rallies and various different things. And then it sort of went on from there. Carried on working with Land Rover Owner for years, and then they were taken over by a larger publishing company. which actually coincided with when I left university. And then that's it, just carried on from there, started working for other magazines within the group. And then in 1996, I had the opportunity to go on Camel Trophy, and then...
and that was as a journalist or as
yeah,
as a
so this was another one of these weird twists of fate. So I had a place as a journalist on the 96 Trophy for Land Rover owner. But coincidentally, a friend of mine was working at the London Boat Show.
And he met the guy that was running the photographic operation for Camel Trophy, a chap called Lee Farrant. And Lee was at the boat show just as a sort of a customer, a sort of a person interested in boats. Got speaking to my mate who was working on one of the stands, and he said, "Oh, you should speak to my mate Nick. He's a keen Land Rover photographer. He'd love to do the Camel Trophy." So they swapped cards and said, "Yeah, get him to give me a call." And so I called him, and again, coincidentally, he happened to live about 6 streets away from where I was living in London.
Unbelievable.
So we went down.
It was
to the
meant
pub.
to be.
That's
Nick.
it. We met at the pub and had a chat, and obviously because I was already going on the event, it was great because he said, "Look, I'll do you a deal. I'll give you some rolls of film, because obviously it was all shot on film then. I'll give you rolls of film if you can basically let us have first dibs on all your stuff. We'll process it, and that's how it started. And then obviously did a reasonable job and got asked to do the event next year as one of the official team. So
And how many years of the Camel Trophy did you participate?
I did the last 4. So
wow.
96,
So you literally saw the last of...
the last, the last Land Rovers, so the 96, 97, 98 event.
Mm-hmm.
There was no event in 99, and then obviously the 2000 event, which was in the Ribs in the South Pacific. So
Right.
very different event, but again...
But to have experienced all of those, and when you... Because for me, I look at Camel Trophy, and I kind of hear it and see it in hushed tones, and with all this excitement steeped in so much
legacy.
legacy
It's a long
around
time ago now. As well.
It is.
It
is.
It's the last event was in 2000. First event in 1980.
Yeah.
And
that was with Jeeps, if I remember correctly.
Correct. Yeah, the first event, 1980, was in Brazil with these license-built Jeeps, Brazilian Jeeps, the U50 it's called.
Yeah.
And then the next event, 81, was in Range Rover, and that was the start of a long association, Camel Trophy and Land Rover, which is amazing.
It is amazing. And the first year that you participated would have been a Discovery 1.
Correct. Yeah.
And
Soft Dash Discovery 1, 1996. Sure. Yeah, TDI.
And when you look back on that experience, what were some of the things that you thought were key takeaways about travel, about driving, about setting up a vehicle that you learned from Camel Trophy?
I was pretty green then. I'd been fortunate to do a few trips because I'd been working while I was at college, so I had done the Warn Challenge events. You remember the Warn Challenge in Morocco? I did that. That was in '94. Transylvania Trophy as well.
I know that one.
Some of these legendary
events
that were back in the '90s.
Yeah, for sure.
So I did that one as well.
Interesting. That Transylvania Trophy looked like it was the entire thing was in water.
It was basically, yeah. It was
I've seen the photos.
Driving down a river.
Unbelievable.
The whole a day's stage was literally driving down a river.
Unbelievable.
Which was pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah, I was 21 years old. It's sort of funny, and you think it's a long time ago now. But anyway, so that was. I'd done a few trips, but I was definitely a bit green when it came to sort of travel. You sort of didn't sort of know what to expect. They gave there was like a little mini event guide which gave you a few tips of what to bring and all the sort of medications, the anti-malarial.
Are any of those still in existence? Those guides?
Yeah, I've got them. I've still got my guide. Yeah.
I would love to.
So I did.
See those
as part of my
scanned.
Research for the book, I actually
went through all this stuff, and it was
I saw that you had some of the lists
included in the book.
Exactly. Yeah. So all that stuff is all around. But anyway, so there was that. But it was. I mean, we
lived out of that car for 3 weeks, and it was. That trip to Borneo was, they say, one of the toughest Camel Trophies. I mean, it felt pretty tough at the time. We did 500 miles in 2 weeks. The first 2 weeks, because it was just bridge building, winching. It was tough, mud. It was classic Camel Trophy.
Sure.
Real proper hardcore, just slow going, getting the convoy through, winching, bridge building. It was a track that hadn't been used for years.
Sure.
The locals,
which is what they loved.
That's it. The locals were on it on mopeds.
Sure.
So we were getting I think it was 40 vehicles, Defenders and Discoveries through. So
they had a road at the end of that.
Yeah, pretty much, exactly. Yeah, that's it. It was definitely definitely a good way.
Camel Trophy that was good because there was a legacy that was left quite often with locals that couldn't get through because bridges were broken and everything else, and actually the trophy would come in and construct these bridges, repair them to get the convoy through.
They were quite robust.
Leave it for the locals to have, and there was quite a few stories of places that the bus couldn't get through, and then all of a sudden because of trophy it could. So it was a very positive legacy in that respect.
And if I remember, the media would oftentimes assist but not drive. Is that true?
No. We would drive as well. I mean, on the
in the same
car.
car.
So obviously there was the competitive sections at the beginning and the end. So obviously media couldn't be involved with that.
But if you were a participating media, you were expected to be part of it. Yeah, very much like help get the car through, winch, participate. And I mean, admittedly, the team members didn't want to let the journalists drive because they were too busy having it. But sometimes it was necessary because of
you're exhausted.
You're working. You're driving for 24 hours. So you inevitably have to share the driving. So so I drove a few.
And you were along with the UK team.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah. So,
and who were the two drivers for the UK team?
Will Tapley and John Leach.
Okay.
So
you
John,
keep in touch with those guys?
So Will actually he lives in Florida, so he's down down in the US.
That's great.
Now. And John, I never kept in touch with John because he actually went off and had a military career. So I think he was about to join the army. So I think remember we talked earlier about you were not allowed to be a member of the serving member of the armed forces to be on Camel Trophy, but he managed to dodge that by not actually joining.
Yeah, I still have my original application, and again, I was just so grateful that Tom Collins took the time to just let me know that I wouldn't qualify because of being in active reserve.
Yeah,
so.
There we go. But it was certainly a steep learning curve for. I was 23 at the time. Yeah, so it was a steep learning curve for a young 23-year-old, but it was great. It was a really good experience, and actually, cemented the fact that that's something that I wanted to do as a career, because I was still wavering at that time about maybe going into television. That was that was something that I was looking at doing, but actually that particular event sort of made me think, actually, do you know what, I want to do this. This is what I've done. This is what I've been doing ever since.
Yeah, well, and those events were just so iconic, and I think transformative for the Land Rover brand, and I think it also really brought overlanding and vehicle-based adventuring to the general consciousness. Not so much in the United States because the Camel Trophy never really gained a lot of popularity there, but in Europe there would be millions of applicants.
Absolutely, yeah. So again, UK was not really a massive market for Camel Trophy.
Sure.
It was only because of the Land Rover connection that was there, but obviously in Spain, France, Germany, huge following. And in fact, a friend of mine, Moy Torredona, who was a competitor for Spain in 1990, is now very much involved with Land Rover. Moy said that he was, when he came back from doing that event, he was on TV. It was like all over the place, and he said it was like being a celebrity.
Or a football star.
Yeah, you'd walk into a bar and say, "Hey, we know you. You're the guy from Camel Trophy," and he said it was incredible from going from not being known at all to being suddenly this sort of personality. So yeah, it was a big deal back in the 90s in many countries.
And then when you were, I'm just curious because photography at that time was quite different, and there would have been
it's all on film.
There would have been you'd been shooting on film, and there would be a whole separate video crew.
Correct. Yeah.
And today, you do both quite efficiently between the two.
Sure. I mean, obviously, I'm primarily a photographer, but do a little bit of video as well. But, I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, you look at camera technology and how things. I mean, we've all got mobile phones, and
we
the
do.
fact that our mobile phones are incredible devices for capturing things is you know, you look back, you know, when we first started back in the 90s, you know, it was almost inconceivable, you know, that this would be the case. But yeah, this is technology, and it's great. I love the fact that, you know, technology allows us to do much better things, be more creative. You know, shooting on RAW is just an incredible thing to be able to change, you know, pick up, bring up shadows, bring down highlights. You know, it's things like that really good. But equally, I love the fact that I had a basic grounding in film. You know, because that's something that
I think so, and it was the same for me. I had the EOS, the eye controlled the early.
Right.
Yeah.
That was proper. That was proper radical.
I felt like it.
Yeah, something like a Star Trek.
Yeah, that's right. But I'm glad that I did start in film, and that I had a dark room, and I spent the time to really understand the mechanics of photography.
Well, that's what Lightroom is basically. Lightroom is a dark room, but without the chemicals.
It is, and it's quite good. I mean,
it's amazing.
Yeah, I remember being quite sad when Aperture went away from Apple, but you know, Lightroom is better now.
Absolutely,
they finally eclipsed anything that Aperture ever did.
Yeah.
So when you think about your photography equipment, because there's no doubt that some that are listening would love to make a career in adventure, in vehicles, and being a photographer to do that. Talk a little bit about what kind of equipment that you do use. Now, of course, all that being said, you know, beautiful images come from talented photographers. They don't come from expensive equipment. But I do notice that you're because I've known you for long enough to watch your kit refine, and you keep downsizing, and you're more efficient in the field now.
Sure. Well, I mean, travel is quite an interesting thing, because obviously you have to decide what you're going to carry and how you're going to travel. So, I mean, the nice thing about working with vehicle-based trips is obviously you have a vehicle to work out of most of the time. So that allows you to have more equipment to be able to carry a different variety of lenses. But obviously, if you're, you know, other times I'm working in a vehicle, but it may not be my vehicle, because obviously when I'm working on a large event, I'm fortunate enough to have the photo car, if you like, the car that has me and a driver that we can get ahead and do all the things you need to do. But if I don't have that, and I have to be, you know, literally have a small seat, and that's all you've got, then obviously a basic kit of a sort of, you know, a couple of bodies, a telephoto zoom and a wide angle to telephoto zoom is pretty much all you need.
So you'll run two bodies. One of them will be on to have the reach
24-70 with a wide angle to sort of mid telephoto, and then on this particular trip I've had the 100 to 500.
I saw that,
which is I'm a recent So I'm a recent convert to the mirrorless system. Yeah. So I've been using Canon EOS for years, where you know, starting with the film days, the EOS 1s, had the whole range of those, the EOS 1Ns, the EOS 1 RSs, which are the semi-transparent mirrors, if you remember those.
I remember, yeah.
I loved those, they were great.
Obviously when the digital photography started coming about, so initial camera was the D30, which was the first Canon own proprietary digital camera. Prior to that we were using the Kodak Canon hybrids, which were basically converted film cameras, which were 2.5 megapixels. Imagine.
Amazing
how things have come on. But anyway,
our phones have 20 times.
Absolutely, that's it. Yeah, and it was slow, and the batteries had run out, and it was just different world. But so now for years I had the 1DX
Mark 1, Mark 2, Mark 3. I had two 1DX Mark 3s, which I absolutely loved. And then my friend Dave Shepherd basically had swapped to mirrorless and said, "You've got to try one of these." So tried it, and I was like, "Wow, this is where it's at. This is where it's going to go." And obviously,
and they're more compact, and
that's it. And so I'm now on two R3s, Canon R3s, and basically chopped everything in. All my old EF lenses went in, and I just did a massive part exchange. It was a big bill.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But so I'm on that. So and one of the advantages is you get this lovely 100 to 500 zoom lens, which as a travel lens is just brilliant.
That's incredible. Because to have that range.
To have the range, and you know, obviously, is a trade-off with the aperture. But obviously, shooting in these bright conditions,
There was plenty of light.
Issue. So
I mean, it was incredible how much light there was in the dunes yesterday.
I've still got my 300 2.8 and my 400 2.8.
Sure.
Which I love those lenses, but those are lenses that you very much use for specific conditions, and obviously out in the dunes you don't need that wide aperture. So, although having said that, if I was doing a wildlife thing,
yes,
and obviously you're going to be doing that early morning dark stuff, so then I would be using those fast apertures.
Yeah, you would. And I think from my perspective too, it's been interesting to see how well you've bridged the visual storytelling between highlighting the product, which is your job, is to highlight the Land Rover, but you also have done a very good job of providing a sense of place as well. And I think that for those that are looking, as a publisher, when I look at photography from those that are submitting stories, I not only want to see the vehicle, but I also need to understand that sense of place. And one of my favorite photos is actually a photo that you took of me in Namibia. I had gotten kind of down on one knee, and there was this beautiful young boy that was in a Himba location, and I was taking some photos of him, and you took a photo of me snapping that shot.
Yeah, right.
But that's the sense of place.
Sure. I mean, I think that's the nice thing about
automotive photographer.
Sure.
But obviously, being an automotive photographer actually has so many different disciplines. So as well as Land Rover stuff, I also work for some other brands as well, which takes me into the world of motorsport. So I've done a few Le Mans 24-hour races, Nürburgring 24-hour races, and obviously capturing that is a very different discipline from doing something that's an expedition in the jungle like Camel Trophy or Sure Challenge. And then equally, with automotive, I'm also shooting cars in the studio. So again, that's completely different.
Full spectrum.
And then we get to go to some amazing, varied places. So you've got the jungle, so you've got the humidity. You've got the general sort of, I mean, as you probably know, the jungle is a hard place to exist.
It's not designed,
as a camera.
It's not designed for humans, let alone cameras. So that's a big issue. And then obviously Arctic conditions. So I shoot in. I've been in Iceland. I mean, we go back to 2015 where we did the launch of the Discovery Sport.
Yeah, I was there for that one with you.
And only Land Rover would be crazy enough to do a car launch in the middle of the Icelandic winter.
And it was tough.
It was tough.
I remember that part of the drive team had to just sleep on the floor of the hotel.
That's right.
They couldn't get to their other property.
It was a proper adventure. I think that's great.
It felt like it.
The fact that this is not a normal car review.
No.
It's like, and it was every day was different. You'd wake up and it was a storm blowing, or you'd wake up and it was a lovely, crystal clear sky.
And that's the beauty of Iceland, is it's just such a dramatic place.
Yeah.
And as a photographer, some of my favorite images that I've ever taken were in Iceland. Just that never-ending sunset, almost.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's really quite.
So we were there. We were there, obviously in winter, which is again it's that time when the period of I think we had 4 hours of daylight a day.
Not much, but
obviously the daylight you do get is low sun all the way through. So it's basically golden hour for 4 hours. So it's absolutely stunning. We absolutely loved it that time.
Yeah, I did love that.
And again, so varied the conditions, but and this is what you have to put your cameras through. The cameras go through all these different conditions. I was in Sweden 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
At -15,
and
here we are, at sort of +40.
Weeks later.
It was warm. When we were in the dunes, it was warm.
It was warm. It
was.
So as an automotive photographer, going back to your question, again, another good friend of mine said that he's not an automotive photographer; he's a landscape photographer. He just happens to put a car in the frame, and I think I approach a little bit that as well. The fact
I see that.
The background is as important as the foreground, and obviously I'm there working for Land Rover, so the car's the star, but equally the context of where the car is really important. And again, why I love working for Land Rover is obviously you've got vehicles that do amazing things in so many different places, and there's always something going on.
Amazing angles, action, sand flying, rock crawl, you've got axle articulation, wheels lifting, all that sort of stuff. In the mud, fording through the muddy waters of Eastner,
Sure.
Just looks cool, doesn't it?
It looks super cool.
And that's one of the things, in a way, don't tell anyone that, it's actually quite easy to photograph a Land Rover doing stuff because it's stuff.
It's visually very interesting.
So, that's one of the things that's a real pleasure, is actually the variety of terrains, landscapes, places, weather conditions, all these things over my 25-year career working for Land Rover.
Yeah, because you're getting close to 30 years now.
Yeah. I first started. My first job was obviously 96.
So 96
Camel
was
Trophy, but then the first time I actually worked for Land Rover directly, because Camel Trophy was a separate company.
I see.
Was in 1997.
Amazing.
When Bill Baker. I'm sure you remember
I do.
God rest his soul. But he actually commissioned me in 97 to
Under One when it was announced in the UK.
Sure.
And that was the first commission I had with Land Rover back in.
Amazing.
26 years ago.
Amazing. Let's pivot a little bit to travel. So, as a professional photographer, you've literally traveled around the world. What were some of your favorite trips, or what was your most favorite adventure that you've been on?
Yeah, again, so one of the nice things working with Land Rover is the fact that I've been to some, many different countries. I think about, it's sort of upper 80s, 85, 86 countries, I think it is.
Sure.
In terms of my favourites, all the travel aspect. Camel Trophy Mongolia in '97 was it's a long time ago, but it again still ranks up there as being a really quite a special trip.
And how different Mongolia would have been in '97. You and I were speaking earlier, and you had gone back in 2008, and I was there in 2010. For me, it was the only time I had been to Mongolia, so it did still feel very nomadic, and there was a lot, because we traveled the northern route, which was very remote. There were still very much nomadic families, but I'm sure it's almost completely different now.
Yeah, I've not been back, and I would love to go back actually. But it's one of those things that in those 10 years, that was 97 to 2008, I definitely noticed a difference there. That the first year, once you got outside the city, it was there were no cars.
Right.
It was horseback or Russian built old motorcycles.
That's right.
That's how they got around. Everyone was in a they're nomadic people, so they basically have these gers which they pack up and then move with their sheep and graze, and obviously as the grazing runs out, they move.
Yeah.
They were all in national dress. Very much, no English spoken. There was no communication apart from smiles and gestures, which was,
and they were
great.
And they are easy to smile people.
Absolutely, yeah, very
just
much
so
very welcoming.
Wonderful.
It's that culture of again being in those harsh environments. Mongolia is a harsh environment. It's cold. It's windy. It's very. The sun is very strong. So the stranger is welcomed in because they need to be protected. So
that's right.
There's very much a culture of that. Anyway, I noticed in the 10 years that I was there, the 10 years in between the first time and the last time I was there, everyone was in national dress, but I noticed that these gers had satellite dishes outside.
Sure.
And then if you looked a bit closer, the people that were still wearing national dress, but if you looked at the bottom of their robes, you could see that they were actually wearing jeans underneath. And it's like, this is the sort of the Western culture starting to come in, and you sort of hope that they haven't lost their own sort of cultural identity, but
it seems to be happening rapidly.
Yeah,
and it's in the end you want them to have whatever access to modernity that they want as a culture.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it is still a sense of loss for the traveler that a lot of these incredibly diverse and unique cultures are homologating. They look very Western now.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, in terms of places, some of the most memorable trips, there's been some incredible ones, and I think I've been fortunate enough to do 3 really long range trips with Land Rover a while ago now. So 1998 we did the Discovery Around the World trip, which was the launch of the Discovery 2. and the first phase of that was London to Calcutta in India.
Okay.
So I did that, which was 25 days.
I remember that trip.
Yeah, that was another Bill Baker one. That was a pretty amazing trip. You know, just going through all of Eastern Europe and then dropping down into Turkey. And we went all the way across Turkey and then into Iran. Across Iran. I mean, again, this would be a trip that would be unrepeatable now.
Yeah, very difficult.
And then into Iran, then Pakistan. We were, skirting the Afghanistan border, and then into India, and then across into Calcutta. So that was a pretty amazing experience.
That would be.
And then let's think, it was 2011, I think it was. Did another trip. In fact, no, that's wrong. I'm thinking about another trip, the Discovery one. We did another one in 2002, which was with the back end of Discovery 2, and that was Norway to Jordan.
Oh, fantastic!
And that was following a rally. So
The latter
Syria,
half, through Syria, exactly. Yeah, through Damascus.
I'm so glad that you were able to see Damascus in its glory.
Amazing.
I didn't go. I had an invitation, and I didn't go, and it'll never be the same.
No, exactly. I mean, one of the things I remember about Damascus was driving through the city, and everyone there was on their horn. So literally, it's like but it wasn't like, it was almost like it wasn't like an aggressive thing. It was just like, boop, I'm here, and it was like once you got into the zone, you were just like bibbing the horn, and it was just like a friendly little sort of game that everyone would play.
Totally.
I've got my little space, and then you're going to go through. It was great fun.
What an incredible country.
And then the last one, another trip to India, which was 2013 with the Range Rover hybrid, and that was across similar sort of route, but instead of going south into Turkey, this time we kept north, and then went through the stands. So Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and
you were on
Kyrgyzstan.
that trip.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
And then we did a drop down across the what's the name of the pass? The Toragat Pass, I think it is, that goes into China.
Sure.
From Kyrgyzstan, and then we then drove all the way down the western side of China, sort of very close to the Indian border.
Wow.
Which was on the Xinjiang Highway. I think they said at the time we were the first Westerners to actually complete the whole north to south of the Xinjiang Highway.
Wow.
Which then takes you into Nepal. And again, you've got this amazing, obviously at very high altitude for most of the time, and then you drop down to this border town, which is sort of the funnel where everything goes from China into Nepal.
Sure.
And then obviously across Nepal, which in itself is an
I've
amazing.
never been.
Oh, it's
you enjoyed it?
Yeah, really enjoyed it. Yeah.
Wow.
Again, I mean, this is one of the things, isn't it? Is when you travel, one of the most memorable things for me, anyway, at least, is the people, the smiling faces, the people that, just those human interactions. And it might be a split second. You might see someone and think, and you take their photograph and, sort of have that interaction, and it's a really nice thing. And then, Nepal, then into India, and again, it's just the experience of actually just driving through these places and people waving. That's one of the things that, particularly if you're doing a trip where you've got a number of vehicles, which often these are. So that particular trip, we had 3 Range Rover hybrids plus 4 Discovery 4 or LR4 support cars. So we were 7 vehicles, all silver with decals, the logos.
I remember that, yeah.
And so, when we come through the town and in the middle of nowhere, it's
quite
bit
a
like
spectacle.
The circus, and it's great because, people come out and they're waving or interested in knowing what you're doing.
Sure.
And, that's one of the things I think which, if anyone's doing a type of overland trip that's a long distance trip, I would recommend having a map of your route on the bonnet, on the door, whatever, because that's the easiest way. When someone says, where are you going, what are you doing, you say, right, have a look at this. And we had these maps on the bonnet of or the hood, I should say, of the cars, so you could show people and say, well, look, we started here in Birmingham, in Solihull, and we've been all this way, and you could actually show, and that was a visual way of people understanding the journey that you're on.
That's right.
So definitely a recommendation.
And I think one of the things that I like most about the trips that you're referring to is that they were all done in stock vehicles.
Yeah, absolutely.
They weren't modified. They were factory.
No, and that's one of the key things with obviously any Land Rover trip is that it has to be in a stock vehicle, because it's, in theory, it's a trip that you could go to a Land Rover dealership, buy the car, and go off and do it.
Well, and you did.
And we did.
You think about, you crossed the Silk Road. You went from Jordan to Norway, and I mean, these are significant overland trips that were done in totally stock standard vehicles.
Yeah. And obviously, we had a lot of assistance in terms of
the car. But the car is, it's a stock vehicle, with maybe a little bit of, the mud terrain tyres, stronger tyres, an extra spare wheel, a winch.
Yep.
But apart from that,
but those are all factory options.
All factory options, absolutely, stuff.
And that was also what was so
stuff.
And that was also what was so impressive about Camel Trophy. They did have some modifications,
but they were mainly for safety, so things like the roll cage, which obviously was important.
And then they tied it into the roof rack and that kind of thing. But everything else was, even the bumper and the winch you could get from a Land Rover dealership.
Yeah, they just bolted on,
Yeah. And I think it's just such an important reminder that you don't have to spend all this money modifying your vehicle. No. You can buy the right vehicle to begin with. And that may be a Land Rover, that may be a Land Cruiser, whatever is the brand of your choice, but buy a good vehicle to start off with.
Yeah.
And you can, in most cases, drive around the world without doing any real modification.
And I think that's one of the things, again, we were talking about earlier, I think, is that, vehicle modifications are good to make your life more comfortable, maybe make it a little bit more capable in the sense of being able to recover yourself and have safety things like roll cages. That's something that is actually quite a good thing. But, at the end of the day, the more stock it is, the more easy it will be if you have any issues. So if you break down or have you hear about these things, people have these trick suspensions, and actually, that's the bit that actually breaks, and then all of a sudden you can't get that particular component in wherever you are in the remote area. So it's good to keep things as I think anyway, as sort of as standard as possible, but obviously with maybe a few little subtle modifications for safety and
I would agree,
to enhance performance in certain areas.
And what else what other takeaways, if someone was to sit down with you like we are now and say, I'd love to start traveling the world by vehicle, what are some other things that you've learned along the way as a traveler that you would give recommendations to if you were talking to your 14-year-old self or your 21-year-old self?
I think set an itinerary, but don't have to be like strict and sort of say we need to be at this location at a certain time, particularly with a long trip. You don't know what's necessarily going to come about. So, for example, you might be stuck at a border crossing. That border crossing that you think is going to take 2 hours might take you 2 days.
Sure.
Because someone somewhere decides that then you're not going to get through. Now, obviously, that's an extreme example, but
that happens.
It does happen.
Of course.
And also, never. You might end up in an area or somewhere where you actually just you like the feel of it, you like the vibe, and you think actually I'm going to stay here for a little bit longer. So, I think if I was planning a trip personally that I was, on a long range travel, I would have probably key spots where I would end up wanting to be, but I would actually the bit in between I'd leave flexible.
Sure.
You might want to spend a bit more time somewhere, or you might actually think somewhere is not really where it's at for me, so I'm going to keep going. So
and then maybe bank those days for a future
moment. That's it. Yeah, I think.
I like
stay
to call
flexible. Don't be too rigid in your planning.
I like to call it strong planning, loosely held.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good.
Because you want to start off being methodical and know where you want to go and have good information, know where those beautiful campsites are, but be open to serendipity along the way.
You meet people, and again, it's this people thing again. You meet people along the way, and they'll open a door for you that you had no idea was there.
Sure.
And then all of a sudden, you want to be able to go and make use of that. So, it's good.
So let's talk about. You have an impressive fleet of Land Rovers yourself. And let's talk about your favorite one to begin with.
Oh gosh, I'm going to pick a favorite.
We won't tell.
Well, I guess probably my favorite has to be the one that I've had longest, which is my 100-inch Defender.
It's a V8. We did laugh earlier about you were saying
Sure.
about you assumed that it was going to be a diesel.
I did, yeah.
I said it's the classic thing where you always want what you can't have. So whereas we have lots of diesels and you have lots of petrols,
Yeah.
we
Totally.
want the V8 and you want the TDI.
That's
so,
right.
That's the way it works. But anyway, so I have a 3.9 V8 100-inch soft top Defender, which is my sort of fun car, and I've had
Sure.
that. I've had that since 1998, and I've rebuilt it twice. And it's, when I got married in 2002, that was the car that we drove away from the church, and all those sort of things. So, that's probably my sort of, as you say, the car that I'll be buried in.
Yep.
But I also have, a couple of, I have 3 classic Range Rovers.
Which are they're just exceptional. They're so amazing.
They're, 1979, which has got 44,000 miles from new, all original. No replacement tailgate. It was one owner car. The guy had it basically just to tow his caravan once a year. So
amazing.
Very fortunate. As I had not planned to buy it at all, but it's one of those things. It was offered to me, and I was like, I'll give it a little drive. I drove it. I'm like, I cannot not buy this car. I couldn't afford it, but I had to buy it. So and thank goodness. And then
it's a nice retirement plan.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
it. Exactly. Then 1995 soft dash. Short wheelbase with a 4.2 factory fitted V8 was the first of the autobiography series. So it was produced by the factory to showcase the autobiography. So had a special paint.
Amazing.
It had Brooklyn's bumpers, the spoiler type.
I remember that. Yeah.
So I actually changed those for chrome bumpers. So I've done my own little modifications to it when I did a rebuild.
Hold on to the originals.
Yeah, I've still got those as well. Yeah. So I may put those back at some point.
Yeah, sure.
So there's those 2. I've also got another soft dash which I've had since 2006. That's in mothballs. That's probably going to be my retirement project to rebuild that.
Sure.
And then what else have I got? I had a CSK which I had to sell last year just to make some space for. It was getting to the point where I couldn't drive anything because I couldn't get anything out of the lockup where I was. So so the CSK that I had was sold. And then I also have a Citroen 2CV, which is my carbon offset program against the 5 V8s that I own.
but the 2CV is such a classic.
Yeah, absolutely. Is
yours because didn't they make one that was also a small little van as well?
Yes, there's the van, the fourgonette as they call it. In France.
Yeah, so Matt Scott, my co-host of the podcast that I believe you've met him on other programs, but he just bought one of those for his wife.
Perfect.
With the little van.
With the corrugated
it's so great.
sides and
It's so great.
It is.
They're
it's
so
just
neat.
a character thing.
Absolutely.
It doesn't go very fast. You have to drive it flat out all the time.
So good.
It's a great fun.
Oh, absolutely. So now if you were going to leave tomorrow to drive around the world, what vehicle would you take?
That's an interesting question, actually. I think it depends where I'm going, but actually, again, it depends what sort of journey I want to have as well, because...
You get to pick.
Well, I know, but the thing is, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because, see, if I want to go for if you like an easy trip, I'd probably take a new Defender. Very similar to the ones that we've been driving the last
the 130,
the 130 with the, again, just the basic equipment, roof rack, winch, serious
good
tires, and then that's pretty much the main modifications you need, really. So if I was doing an easy trip, I'd go for that. But actually, there's something in me that actually I quite like the idea of taking a series vehicle. I quite fancy getting a long wheelbase Series 2 and just having that and just taking that on.
Being in the moment every moment.
Yeah, because you are in the moment. You know, it's you're living. I mean, I've done a few trips with Ike Goss and the team. Out. We did a trip in the Black Rock Desert about 18 months ago.
Wow.
In 3 Series 1s.
Wow.
And it was great. I mean, it was just pure.
So charming.
It is. It's just you are, but it's not as comfortable clearly, but it's just a completely different. As you say, you're in the moment. You're in there. You're driving it. The car, you've got to coast
and the plane can change at any moment.
And it's the simplicity as well that
I
really enjoy. I think it's in today's complicated life of tech and being connected and everything else, actually having that sort of analog experience of just, there's no gadgets, there's nothing to help you. It's you and the machine.
Yeah.
That I quite like that idea.
Well, maybe that'll be part of the retirement plan.
Yeah, but you don't want to be in a hurry.
Yeah.
So it comes back to what I was saying about the time.
Yeah.
You've got no particular itinerary, just you start where you start and you finish where you finish.
That appeals to me.
It does, and I think most people find those trips like Ray and Marianne Hyland that kind of recreated the first overland trip, and they did it in a 1950s Series 1
right.
a few years ago, and that was just so incredible what they did as a family, them and their sons and everything else like that, all in a 80-inch.
Yeah, that's it.
So
that's it.
Incredible.
But it makes also that focuses your mind on what you're taking. So, for example, going in an 80, you haven't got much space, have you? And
you don't.
And in reality, you don't need much, really.
You just don't.
In life, you just need shelter, food,
and and company, really. Those are the three things that you need, and there's a lot to be said for that, isn't it?
Yeah,
take an 80 and you've got a limited amount of stuff to take.
Totally.
So it's you take a few clothes and you wash them when you can, and it's just basic needs.
There's a lot to be said for that.
There is, and I think you have a better experience oftentimes.
Yeah.
And as you get into countries with lower GDP per capita, then everything gets cheaper. Even accommodations get cheaper.
And more simple. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So you've had a really significant recent release of a book. So your career started with a book.
Yeah.
And then
hasn't ended yet.
Yes. No. But COVID hit.
Sure.
And did you just wake up one day and decide to write a book?
So you say COVID. So, funny enough, that Namibia trip.
That's right.
Was in sort of February.
It was
to early March 2019.
Yep.
And then we came back from that, and obviously as we were there, it was just starting to kick off globally, wasn't it? And,
that's right.
We got to the end of March, and I had 3 months worth of work, which was booked, and then all of a sudden, it was no longer booked, as it was for all of us. Base of the world went on hold, didn't it? On pause.
That's right.
So it was that thing of like, right, what am I going to do now? So, as you say, I had
the idea to do a Camel Trophy book had always been something that I'd had in my mind. It was maybe going to be a retirement project or something to do, when I had some spare time. And obviously, with COVID, I suddenly had lots of spare time. So
exactly.
So I decided to make the most of it and actually go and start interviewing people, start reaching out to try and find the original photography. And that's what I did.
Been so much work.
Yeah, well, it was funny because it's something that I think when I look at you've seen the book. It's
impressive.
It's quite a comprehensive.
It is
volume, if I say so myself. It's one of those things that once I started, it just became an absolute obsession, a labour of love, and it was an absolute pleasure to be able to dedicate the time I did dedicate to it. It was, literally months and months of work.
You can see it, and in my mind, it is such a way to honor all of those people who worked so hard to make Camel Trophy a possibility, and just the event itself, all the competitors, and for those that are listening, take a look. The name of the book.
It's called Camel Trophy: The Definitive History.
That's right. So the last time that I was on Amazon, I did see a few copies that were still available. I'm sure that there are some on eBay. There's no question that they'll start to get more and more expensive as time goes on.
That's it. Yeah.
It's
been
out
a couple of years now, I think. Yeah.
It has, and it is. It's the only book that I have on my coffee table at my office, and it's just awesome.
So it's a heavy thing.
It is.
So I think it's 300 and something pages.
Yeah, perfect bound.
950 photos, I think it is.
Yeah.
150,000 words. It's a fairly comprehensive volume, but
it is.
The point is there was a lot to write about. Camel Trophy was on for 40 years. An amazing number of stories. I spoke to all the sort of main people that were instrumental in delivering Camel Trophy over 20 years. right from Andreas Bender, who was the first guy that sort of started it back in 1980, through to Duncan Lee, who was the American that worked for R.J. Reynolds, that basically developed the event from being a German event through to a more global event. And then other Ian Chapman, who was obviously event director for many years, and Nick Horn, who took over at the end.
Sure.
That was it was an amazing to be able to speak to these people, and of course these people are in their 70s and 80s. And Duncan Lee's in his 80s now.
Yeah.
And as sad as it is to say, these stories are not going to be told forever. So and that was one of the things I really wanted to do. I mean, sadly there were quite a few people that I knew on Camel Trophy that have already passed.
Yeah.
And I think of some of the stories they could have told, and sadly they've gone. So that was one thing I really wanted to do, was to get those stories down onto paper before they were gone forever. And likewise the photography, again, that was something that it was all shot on film. So trying to get hold of, particularly those early years, the 1980s, trying to get hold of those original pictures. So I actually managed to contact some of the original German photographers. Again, they're in their 80s now, and they still had some of their original film left, and I was able to get hold of that and scan it.
Amazing.
It was great, and I think that's where I think I'm proud that I managed to achieve that, and it was, obviously COVID was a tragedy in many respects, but obviously the ability to actually have that time and dedicate that time and not have any, obviously it was worrying in the sense that obviously I didn't have an income.
Yeah, sure.
As we all did, because I was, as a freelancer, obviously clearly if you're not working, you're not earning, so that was a bit stressful, but actually that was then able to focus on doing the book and having that as my sort of pandemic focus was really good. So
it's impressive. It really is.
It was a pleasure to write it, to be honest. I did enjoy doing it, and hopefully that comes.
No, it was a gift to the whole community and those all that love the Camel Trophy, and it's just a really impressive volume, and I can't wait to see what book you come up with next, because
books have been a part of your life.
I'm thinking about doing another Camel Trophy book actually, but more just based on the photography. So we'll see if that happens.
Sure.
And then I might actually just go full circle, because the Range Rover conversions book that I told you about at the beginning. So since obviously I was 13, I've learnt an awful lot more since then. And I think there's a lot of other stories that I'd like to sort of look, because whereas that was more about the scrapbook side of things, the ooh and the wow moment about the vehicles. There are actually some interesting stories about the vehicles and how they were built and who they were built for. So I'm quite keen to tell some of those stories.
The history of the Pope Mobile.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. Yeah, that's it.
That's my sort of thing that hopefully there won't be another pandemic. So
let's hope.
So I'll just have to find some time, other ways to do it. But definitely got some more books in me. Definitely.
Speaking of books, one of the things that I love to ask, and this is a purely selfish question that I ask of all of our guests, is: are there any books that you love? And it could be of any genre. It doesn't have to be about travel. Do you have a favorite book or a favorite couple books? And it's okay if you don't as well.
Yeah, I'm pretty rubbish actually, because I go through phases of actually reading loads of books, and then I don't read books for a long time.
Yeah.
And I think it's tied into sort of work and
you're busy.
Sort of, exactly, because sometimes it's quite nice to have a little read of an evening, but so I can't really think of any sort of particular. I enjoy all sorts of books. I enjoy novels. I enjoy books about automotive. I enjoy photography books.
Sure.
So I wouldn't probably say there's any particular book that I would sort of. I wish I could sort of go. Everyone needs to read this one. I have to sort of. Maybe
they need to read the Camel Trophy book.
Well, exactly. That's it. Yeah, start there and then work down.
Yeah. No. Absolutely. Exactly.
Well, work up.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, Nick, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
It is a genuine pleasure. When I first started the podcast with Matt Scott, I made a list of what we considered to be dream guests to have on this podcast, and you were on that list. So we both have tremendous admiration for the work that you do. The quality of your photography is inspiring for me as a photographer. And then you're also very well traveled, and you've become a master of your craft. And to have such a storied career, starting with Land Rovers, well, starting at 13, writing your first book, which is so impressive in and of itself, to participating in the Camel Trophy and driving around the world with Land Rover. What a gift your life has been, for sure.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? We were just talking. I'm 50 this year.
Yeah.
And I mean, for a start, I can't believe I'm 50. I can't believe I've got 2 children.
It'll be okay.
Yeah, that's right.
I went through that. I went through that in December of last year.
So yeah, I've got 2 children, right. 17 and 14. I don't know where that went. I remember when they were, this big.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, life does go like that, which is, I guess, is a reminder just to make the most of it. Do those travel dreams. I'm obviously very fortunate, and I've been able to go and travel and explore. And do many things that people have.
That's right.
Would love to do, but equally, I always feel there's something else reaching out there. I think everyone's a bit restless to go and see more, and even though the world's a small place, it's a big place, and I think
there's a lot to see.
People should definitely make the most and explore.
Well, like we just did.
Exactly.
Like we just did.
Absolutely.
In the deserts of the UAE, looking out into Oman to the side, they're amazing. How do people find out more about you? You have a great Instagram account.
Yes. So I have. I am pretty poor on social media. I've just basically got Instagram.
That's good.
So that's good. So yeah.
And Nick, what's your account?
So Nick Dimbleby @Nick Dimbleby is my account. So NICK Dimbleby DIMBLEBY.
Okay.
I have a website which I should really update. It's quite old now. It's about probably 7 or 8 years old.
Yeah.
But there's lots of my other work there. Some of the non-Land Rover. And
what's your website?
It's nickdimbleby.com.
All right, perfect.
And yeah, that's it really. That's
I would suggest
online presence.
I would suggest that people follow your Instagram account. Just watching to the lead up to this trip, seeing these images of the 130 in the dunes, it certainly got my appetite built. So
yeah, I always find it difficult to know what to put on there, because I've obviously got a huge back catalogue of stuff.
Sure.
But it's that thing, I think, well, maybe I need to be putting on my current stuff, but I sort of occasionally bring out some of the old stuff as well. And I think it's one of those things. I just sort of, I just need to mix it up a bit.
But I think people enjoy that.
Yeah, exactly.
They seem
occasionally put a little bit of some of the stuff I shot on film, scan that in and put it on. So yeah, I guess if you like Land Rovers, then probably my Instagram's probably a good place to go.
It will be. Nick, thank you again so much for being on the podcast. And we thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thank you. Excellent.
Thank you, my friend.